been talking about this in our 193T class. Can you talk a little bit about some of the factors that limit the diversification of the canon as you see it and understand it? Because I think a lot of it has to do with the structures that have been put in place in the first place to sort of make it difficult for scholars of color, for writers of color to penetrate that and to have a healthy conversation with, someone like Shakespeare, right? So can you talk a little bit about some of the limits that you see that make it difficult for that canon to be diversified in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've existed in this power hierarchy that has set up these stereotypes for people to kind of live into. And then, even if we look into our recent past, I mean, it's not like we've been very progressive, like for the last 100 years. I mean, we've still been battling a lot of racism, and, I think that, academia still holds on to some of those power hierarchies. If you look into just what is valued as this, like, the ideal American or the ideal, European writing style, and then everything else is exotic. It's special. It's different. It's not a part of it. It's just something outside of it. And I think that it's hard to make changes, because I think within a university as well, you're still competing with other universities for status as well. So you want to mimic maybe a different, university, like say maybe Yale or NYU. You don't want to be like that progressive that you start getting this criticism that you're not teaching, what is supposed to be taught. So I think that there's a lot of there are a lot of obstacles into really integrating this like multicultural literatures into the American canon for these political social reasons. And I think also the fact that we have multi-ethnic U.S. literature also gives the sense that, well, we've already talked about this. It's there, so why make a big deal about it? But even though it exists, it still exists outside. It's still not, like Nicole was saying, it's not part of the requirements that undergraduates have to take. And you had one diversity, and it's like, well, it's there, but it's not really, because you don't have a wide understanding of it. You only get like a single story of what multi-ethnic U.S. literature is. So I think there's a lot of reasons why this has happened, and change is slow, and like we were talking about in Salt of the Earth, it's painful too. So there is just this. There are a lot of obstacles, because the university is still it's like a business, They still have to kind of compete against all these other universities and kind of say, well, we're teaching, the standards.
And I remember, like, I went to school at DePaul, Indiana. It's a small liberal arts school, and so I was probably one of two Mexicans on campus. But the only, and I started as an English major right away because I knew I wanted to write, and writing was something that I was introduced to very early on. But the only book by a Latina author was that I read in my 4 years there was Sandra Cisneros' House on Mango Street. Now what that told me was that the only way I would be listened to or published was if I could write that story, or if I could sort of, do that thing. And I did it for 2 or 3 years.
We all did.
Yeah. And actually, long story short, I was so into Sandra Cisneros that I went to see her in Chicago. And she was really sweet, and she's like, send me your story, send me your writing. I told her I wanted to be a writer. She's like, send me your writing. I sent it to her, and her agent got back to me, kindly saying, you want to write something else. You don't want to write Sandra's, story. But I was doing it for a long time, and I think it happens now where a lot of young writers think that they sort of internalize a single story, and because what's being communicated to them is that the only thing that matters or is valued in academia is that single story. So it's dangerous for writers who want to write, who can't say, I'm living in this place and in that place, or I have a duality. or I just sort of I do different things, so it sort of limits that and internalizes it. And then as it was mentioned in the other panel, I think what it also does is that it creates that sort of same limitation within our own writing, or our own communities of color, where we're then looking at each other and saying, no, you're not writing what's Mexican, you're not writing what a Latino writer is supposed to write. So I think those are the limitations that the single stories does or causes.
Well, going on that theme, it lends itself to the idea of exoticism and how writers of colors are always kind of, especially American writers of color, are always sort of foreigners in our own country. If you identify yourself as of color, not white, you're immediately somehow exotic. If you're Mexican, oh, did your parents cross the border? If you're Japanese, if you're even part Japanese, do you speak Japanese? Were you born in Japan? No, I was born in Corcoran. My mom, my biological mother probably worked at the prison.
I have a question that, Nicole, for you and for Miriam. While we're on this kind of subject of the canon, what's the future of the canon, you think? Because I look at, because we are a diverse country, right? And the UK, I mean, curry is more popular than fish and chips, right? So what's the future of the canon? For anybody, I guess.
Optimistically, I think it is changing, I would hope. It may be slow, but I think it's changing. But I think it's going beyond, it's changing beyond the realm of race, but also in different media, I guess you could say. For example, and this is actually composition related, so sorry I'm taking over your territory. For one of my classes, I'm observing first-year writing classes, and my focus is on actually the use of popular culture texts. And so I'm watching first-year writing teachers use graphic novels, they're using advertisements, they're using comics, they're using really popular novels. And so I think the canon potentially can expand because there is, I think, a movement for growth going on.
What about the rest of you guys? You agree?